Today, Attorney General Eric Holder announced the Obama administration's new policy regarding when and under what conditions the government can invoke the state secret privilege. The new plan makes it more difficult for the government to cite national security as the reason to withhold evidence in court. The Bush administration was often criticized for blocking lawsuits by refusing to disclose classified information. Depending on your point of view, the new plan is a step toward a more transparent and accountable government, or it risks exposure of tools vital to fight terrorists. If you have questions about what's in this new policy and what it means, give us a call, 800-989-8255. Email talk@npr.org. You can also join the conversation on our website. That's at npr.org. Click on Talk of the Nation. Charlie Savage is covering the story for the New York Times, and he joins us from a studio here in Washington. Nice to have you with us today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
And how is this policy different?
Well, under the old policy, which the Bush administration used after 9/11, but other administrations before that also used before state secrets became as controversial as it has become in recent years, things were much more ad hoc. You would always have the head of whatever agency controlled the information involved in the decisions. So that could be the CIA or it could be the NSA in more recent times. But the Attorney General would only really get involved if it was the Justice Department, if it was, say, the FBI's information the government wanted to keep secret, or if it was a very high-profile issue. And so one way in which this is different is it says that high-level Justice Department officials will review every assertion that someone in the government wants to make independently to make sure that they think this information should properly be withheld and that there's no way to do it in a way that's less sweeping, such as by allowing the lawsuit to go forward, but just without this particular document. Because one of the ways that this has become controversial in recent years is that more and more the government is using it to shut down lawsuits entirely at their onset without any day in court for whoever's filed it.
And as you mentioned, there was considerable criticism of the Bush administration for invoking it repeatedly, and there were any number of lawsuits about the use of telephone companies to provide links to allow the government to tap phone calls from overseas to the United States, and the government frequently invoked this, this is national security, this is a state secret, we can't disclose this information in court.
That's right. The program of surveillance without warrants is one of the broad categories that there were a lot of lawsuits over, and that this privilege was invoked repeatedly to block. Another being torture and extraordinary rendition, the CIA's programs for transferring and interrogating detainees. Although the Bush administration, owns the beginning of that story, it should be noted that in the early months of the Obama administration, it also continued to assert the state secrets privilege in the same way in those same cases, just which were on appeals and so forth. And so that alarmed a lot of civil liberties groups and some Democratic lawmakers, which led to the introduction of legislation in both the House and the Senate that would roll back and restrict how the privilege can be used and require judges to take a much more searching inquiry into what exactly is this evidence the executive branch says can't be introduced in court, and do they agree that it should not go forward?
And is this just court cases, or would it also apply to Freedom of Information Act requests?
It applies to any civil lawsuit in which the government is trying to withhold information. I think that a Freedom of Information request for classified information, though, you would not need a state secrets privilege to block, because the Freedom of Information Act doesn't apply to things like that on its face.
Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting about this policy is it basically takes much of the reforms that legislation would achieve, and it echoes them as far as much more searching review, try to find a way to let the lawsuit go forward, have a higher standard for what's going to trigger this, but puts them, instead of in the courtroom, in the upper levels of the Justice Department. So you still have, at the end of the day, the critics would contend, executive branch officials deciding whether the executive branch official should be allowed to shut down a lawsuit. It's probably, for bureaucratic reasons, definitely going to result in fewer assertions of the privilege, because the incentives now are, if you're a trial attorney, or you really don't want these heavy hitters looking over your shoulder. But on the high-level cases, the warrantless surveillance program, rendition, those things probably would have already had the Attorney General looking at them, and it's unclear that this would make a difference on something of that level of of controversy.
And how are various intelligence agencies responding to this? Do they fear that their sources and methods, as they would put it, might be exposed?
Well, that construct of is this great from a civil liberties perspective or terrible from a national security hardliner perspective isn't really the storyline that I'm seeing today. I'm not seeing much at all from alarmed intelligence agencies or national security hardliners. What I'm seeing is civil liberties groups who think, or bloggers and so forth, who think maybe this doesn't go far enough to the extent that this is something that could blunt momentum for Congress passing legislation to codify the changes in statutes. It's a bad thing, or it's a really good first step, but it's not sufficient to take care of the problems which have emerged as the use of this privilege, this executive power, has escalated in recent years.
We're talking with Charlie Savage of the New York Times, their Washington correspondent. He's at a studio here in Washington, D.C., talking about the announcement by the Attorney General Eric Holder today that the standards for declaring something a state secret, therefore not admissible in court, will be raised as of October 1st. If you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call, 800-989-8255. Email is talk@npr.org. And let's see if we go to Jerry. And Jerry's with us from O'Fallon in Missouri.
Good afternoon. A very good topic. I don't know if this pertains directly, but in fact, I just read this afternoon that of only 3 of 763, quote, sneak and peek requests that was for authority to search people's homes without their permission or knowledge, applied to, these were in 2008, involved terrorism cases. Almost the rest exclusively were drug cases. And it's just another example, I guess, of, given an inch, everyone seems to want to take a mile. I mean, it seems like national security has become the last refuge of scoundrels, so to speak, to abuse that quote.
Well, I'm not sure that applies directly to the change in policy we're talking about, Charlie.
No, exactly. But I think the same thing applies, that it's the national security excuse seems to be just overused, has been in the past.
I can comment briefly on that. I mean, the caller is right that this falls under this broad umbrella of the escalation of government power after 9/11 in terms of both secrecy and in surveillance-type activities, counterterrorism activities, and the sort of ongoing controversies over that. I think that what he's referring to was something that came up today at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on whether to reauthorize certain sections of the Patriot Act. And Senator Russ Feingold, who's been a critic of sort of the curtailing of individual rights in the wake of 9/11, was questioning a Justice Department official, David Criss, about the fact that the Patriot Act had expanded the government's power to search homes without letting the person know that they had come in there and had seized certain items, the so-called sneak and peek warrant. And yet it was used almost exclusively, as the caller notes, not for terrorism investigations, but for ordinary criminal matters like drug investigations. And the response from the Justice Department official was, well, that's true, but there are separate things we use, FISA orders for national security issues, and so it's not that surprising that the majority of this stuff is not related to terrorism. Feingold says, yeah, but it was sold as a terrorism tool. It was part of the Patriot Act. So that's the debate that the caller is referencing.
Jerry?
What I find curious is that most of the people who have a tendency to support the Patriot Act, et cetera, are self-labeled conservatives who are seemingly at the same time outraged at bigger government. And yet what I think a lot of these laws seem to do is allow government to get even larger, or at any rate, at least unchecked.
All right, Jerry. Thanks very much for the call. Appreciate it.